At 6, guilty of spying for Russia. 3 Bulgarians who masterminded a Europe-wide operation from a B&B in Great Yarmouth. The trio were part of an espionage ring operating between 2020 and 2023. They wore spy glasses to target journalists, sending back intelligence while on a plane in real time. Also this evening, despite another attack on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, Donald Trump again criticizes Kyiv over the war with Russia.
We're doing very well with Russia, but right now they're bombing the hell out of Ukraine, and I'm finding it more difficult, frankly, to deal with Ukraine.
3 Bulgarian nationals have been found guilty of spying for Russia in an operation masterminded from a bed and breakfast in Great Yarmouth. Katrin Ivanova, Tiomir Ivanchev and Vanya Gabarova, all from London, were part of a group of Bulgarians who spied between 2020 and 2023. 3 others had already pleaded guilty, and the full details of their activities can now be reported for the first time. They undertook elaborate surveillance of people and places at the behest of Moscow, including investigative journalists and surveillance of a US military base in Germany. They crisscrossed Europe from their base in the UK. Daniel De Simone has our top story.
Police! Police! Police!
Smashing a Russian spy cell by raiding a guest house in Great Yarmouth.
Stay there! Stay there!
The owner is Bulgarian Orlin Rusev.
Stay there! What? Stay there!
It's the wrong place.
Support!
I think it's the wrong place.
But his guest house is full of tools used for spying, and officers find thousands of chat messages organising espionage. He became one of 3 Bulgarians who pleaded guilty to spying for Russia.
Are all of these devices yours?
I have purchased some on the eBay, and I'm repairing many of those.
They're yours, aren't they?
Not all of them.
The sheer scale of what was recovered from the espionage base was unprecedented. We're talking about devices that can, for example, be taken close to a mobile phone and extract the data from that phone and exploit it. And there were 11 drones, over 200 mobile phones, nearly 500 SIM cards. The scale was enormous.
Orlin Rusev moved to the UK as a businessman over 15 years ago. After being recruited as a Russian spy, he recruited other Bulgarians working in normal jobs to carry out surveillance, including Biza Jambazov and girlfriend Katrin Ivanova, a couple who ran courses in London teaching British values.
Entry 3, Introduction to British Value.
Also in the cell were a beautician, a mixed martial arts fighter and a painter-decorator. The spy cell conducted operations in the UK and Europe, following people targeted by Russia and even seeking to identify Ukrainian troops believed to be training at a US military base in Germany. In London, they filmed the Kazakhstan embassy, where they planned to stage a protest, with the pretense they could then give information about protesters to Kazakhstan intelligence to curry favour for Russia. Throughout Europe, they spied on journalists Christo Grozev and Roman Dobrokotov, who exposed Russia's role in the Salisbury nerve agent attack, with the cell deploying these spy glasses to film them. Using the glasses to film Christo Grozev on a plane, sending the footage in real time to the cell. Some members had discussed killing him. Some spoke about kidnapping fellow journalist Roman Dobrokotov.
And I'm very lucky to be alive, actually. I think assassination was one of the options that they reviewed. But even if it was kidnapping, that doesn't mean that I was just, brought to Russia and then let free. It was about interrogating and then killing.
The cell leader Rusev was directed from abroad by Russian state asset Jan Marsalek, who's wanted in Germany for fraud. His whereabouts are unclear.
He was acting as a middleman between the Russian intelligence services and this group of Bulgarians. So a direct line of communication from the Russian intelligence services through to Rusev which generated all of their surveillance activity here.
Who ordered that you should be targeted?
I think that it was Vladimir Putin directly. In this dictatorship, you would never take responsibility on your own to do such political stuff. You will always have direct order from the president. It doesn't have to be a written order.
From the Kremlin to Great Yarmouth and the unlikely faces of a real threat within.
Yeah, it's fascinating detail, Daniel. What does all this reveal about Russia's spy operations here?
Well, this was the first time we've really seen in a UK criminal court the full details of how a Russian operational spy cell actually works. So all the thousands of messages where they were organising surveillance, the filming of targets, discussing everything they were doing, and then the commands coming down from the intelligence asset abroad. In the past, we've sort of seen the end of this type of activities. If you think of the Salisbury poisonings 7 years ago this week, earlier the fatal poisoning in London of Alexander Litvinenko, this is sort of shows how it gets to that stage, and that was lives were really risked in this case, and police have been at pains to say that. And I think what it shows is Russia is sometimes struggling to carry out normal, ordinary espionage. It's actually having to resort to recruiting people who aren't even Russians, people who are working in normal jobs to carry out this kind of surveillance. And although this is the first time we've seen a case like this in the UK courts, it's certainly not going to be the last.
Indeed. All right, Daniel, thank you. Daniel De Simone there. Now, Donald Trump says he's finding it more difficult to deal with Ukraine, and it may be easier dealing with Russia as he attempts to broker a peace deal. His comments came while he acknowledged Russia was bombing the hell out of Ukraine following a night of sustained attacks on the country's energy infrastructure. Earlier, Kyiv said it used French-built jets for the first time to push back. We'll be live in Washington in a moment, but first from Kyiv, here's James Waterhouse.
It was a night when Russia launched 70 missiles and 200 drones at Ukraine's energy and gas infrastructure. At least 18 people were injured, including 4 children. The damage was concentrated on the cities of Odessa in the south and Kharkiv in the northeast. This was the first such attack since the US cut off its military aid and intelligence for Ukraine, which are central to its defences. In another first, Kyiv says it used French Mirage jets to intercept missiles after being delivered last month.
It's these kind of attacks on civilian infrastructure that Ukraine and Europe have suggested could be paused in an initial ceasefire, along with a naval truce in the Black Sea and prisoner of war exchanges. As for Russia, well, despite Donald Trump threatening Moscow with sanctions, its position has barely softened.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this.
The damage from last Friday's shouting match in the Oval Office seems to be subsiding, but President Trump is continuing to be softer on Moscow.
I find that in terms of getting a final settlement, it may be easier dealing with Russia, which is surprising because they have all the cards. I mean, they're bombing the hell out of them right now. And I put a statement in, a very strong statement. Can't do that, can't do that. Mr. President, we're trying to help them. And Ukraine has to get on the ball and get a job done.
President Zelensky says he will travel to Saudi Arabia next week, where Ukrainian and US officials are due to discuss an initial ceasefire with Russia. Ukraine's leader won't be in the meetings, but says he hopes they'll be meaningful. As the politicians try to end this war, the soldiers will keep fighting and dying. Russia's invasion and Ukraine's defence has been a never-ending endeavour for some time. James Waterhouse, BBC News, Kyiv.
Let's go live to Washington. Sarah Smith is there. The president's been speaking this afternoon. He's been suggesting it's easier dealing with the Russians than the Ukrainians, while he acknowledges that Ukraine is getting bombed to bits.
Yeah, it's rather odd to work this out because actually Donald Trump earlier today put out a post on social media saying that because Russia was pounding Ukraine so hard on the battlefield, he was considering tightening sanctions against Russia because of this. So clearly quite critical of what's been going on overnight. And then, as you heard in the Oval Office, despite that, still saying that he's finding Ukraine difficult to deal with and Russia much easier. He was asked whether or not he really believes that Vladimir Putin wants to make a peace deal, and he said that not only does he believe that, he thinks that despite Russia holding all the cards, as Donald Trump put it, he thinks that President Putin is prepared to be more generous than he needs to be when it comes to talking about peace, while he still sounds clearly very irritated with Ukraine and its leader. We had thought, actually, in the last 48 hours or so, we were watching tensions ease a little bit between the US and Ukraine. President Zelensky sent a letter to Donald Trump that was described here in the White House as a good and positive first step. And we're working towards those talks in Saudi Arabia next week, where very senior Ukrainian and US officials will be sitting down to talk about a framework for a peace deal as well as a possible ceasefire. And yet it was quite obvious from just the response Donald Trump gave to those unscripted questions that he still is finding it easier to deal with Russia and instinctively annoyed by the approach that Ukraine and President Zelensky are taking to this.
But first, a poll commissioned for ITV News has revealed how a week of international diplomatic turmoil has damaged faith in America's handling of the Ukraine war. The survey, which was carried out by Ipsos, also found the British public isn't convinced that the UK should be spending more on defence. Well, here are the key findings. Almost 3/4 of those surveyed do not trust President Trump to deliver peace for Ukraine, with 2/3 believing that Ukraine is being treated unfairly by him. Additionally, more than 2/3 think he made the wrong decision by pausing aid to Ukraine. However, when it comes to the crucial issue of defence spending, public opinion is actually more divided. It's split on whether defence spending should be increased, even if it means higher borrowing, increased taxes or cuts to other public services. The city of Liverpool hosted Eurovision for Ukraine and welcomed many of its refugees who fled the war. Chloe Keedy heard the views of people there.
Liverpool's iconic waterfront is just one of its links to the world. Historically a thriving port city, a certain four-piece band is without doubt its most famous export, but it's also a place that prides itself on welcoming people in. 2 years ago, Liverpool hosted the Eurovision Song Contest on behalf of Ukraine.
It felt like, home for especially a bit of Ukraine there for a couple of weeks.
This Ukrainian cafe in Crosby, run by refugees, retains just a little bit of that magic.
So you had never been to Liverpool before Eurovision?
No, and I just fall in love with this city. It's like just amazing. I feel really welcome.
But they say they couldn't feel more different about how their country's being treated by America's new president.
We are very upset watching because the war continues and every day takes more people's life and all destructions in the country.
You're gambling with World War III.
It's exactly a week since this disastrous White House meeting between Presidents Trump and Zelensky, and Ukrainians weren't the only ones who found it difficult to watch.
It was absolutely unbelievable that he talked to the Ukrainian president like that, and he belittled him, the safety of people, safety of Europe, and it's like he doesn't care. It's scary. It's really scary. And there was talk about putting a penny on income tax to help support, and I agree with it.
He's shown contempt for Ukraine, its people, and also a lot of contempt for Europeans. It's very much a self-centred president, and that we haven't seen before.
Outside the University of Liverpool, not one student we spoke to said they trusted Trump to deliver peace.
No, I don't think Trump has Ukraine's best interests at heart at all. The US does have so much power, and the fact that Trump's in charge now and he's making all these decisions just in the first few weeks of being elected is quite worrying for the future. I think it does have a knock-on effect on us in the UK as well.
Do you think President Trump was right to pause aid shipments to Ukraine?
I mean, of course not.
No.
I hate Trump. He's a horrible man. But, I think he's maybe fast-tracked the conversation a bit more.
I think he has a way of being able to get through to certain leaders that maybe other presidents previously would not have been. But I don't think his intentions are in the right place. Seeing when Zelensky came to the UK after and met Keir Starmer made me feel much better about being in this country and having a leader that respects the other leader.
But the view from this social club south of the city is that the government's defence spending target is missing the mark.
Was the Prime Minister right to put defence spending up, do you think?
To buy tanks and ships and warships. They're useless in a nuclear war.
Would you rather see money spent on defence or things like public services, welfare?
Public services have got to be right, and especially our pensioners.
But defence is important, but we'd have been a lot safer as part of the European Union.
I sleep better when I knew our defence is intact.
And is that more important than public services and welfare for you?
I'm not saying it's more important, what I'm saying is it's equally important.
Just like the statues on Crosby Beach, Liverpool is a city that has always looked out towards the rest of the world. What most people here seem to agree on is that the fate of Ukraine will carry consequences back to these shores. Chloe Keedy, ITV News, Liverpool.